Welcome into the I-80 boys. Today we're talking about the Georgia Bulldogs. I'm going to start off with the offense. Christian, I'll kick it over to him for the defense here. But, hey, these are your Bulldogs, Christian. 13-1 last year, 8-0 in the SEC. They did get left out of the playoffs, but we know what they did to Florida State in that bowl game. Holy shit. But as far as everything goes with their offense, last year, 40.1 points per game. That was one of Georgia's best years ever offensively. That was fifth in the nation. They averaged almost 500 yards per game. That was also fifth in the country. Offense was amazing last year for Georgia. The biggest thing ever, Carson Beck decided to return. He's back. And like I said, this guy's came off probably, I think he had probably one of the best years ever as a Georgia quarterback last year. Broke a ton of records for you guys. He was really, really efficient. And then, we talked about the weapons. Now, they did lose Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, two guys off the NFL. Brock Bowers was an elite tight end. They do bring back, though, their slot receiver, Dominic Levitt. He played a ton last year. And then Arian Smith. This guy's got Olympic track speed. This guy's brutally fast. He's back as well. They also brought in that, I think it's from Miami, that transfer Colby Young. He had a ton of potential. I think we'll see him out there a lot. As far as the wide receivers goes, Georgia doesn't have I don't think they have like a 1A. They just got a ton of really good wide receivers, in my opinion. And that was kind of the way it was last year as well. McConkey was good, but Brock Bowers, we know what he did too as well. But I can't think of was it Oscar Delt, the backup to this guy's a stud. Unfortunately, he just had to play behind Brock Bowers. I think he's uber talented. He'll be playing on Sundays as well. So Georgia offensively in the passing game, I think, is going to be fine. We know what they bring there. The running game, you're going to bring in, Trevor Etienne, and he came from Florida. This kid, I think, is pretty damn talented. If he's anything like his brother who played at Clemson, he's now playing with the Jags. He's going to be good. I think he's a little bit of an upgrade there. It'll be interesting to see how he plays with an offensive line, definitely what Georgia has, unlike Florida. Offensive line struggled there mightily last year at Florida. So overall, offensively, Georgia's got a ton of talent, ton of weapons. I think they're going to be great. I actually think Carson Beck is going to have an amazing season again this year. I think they're going to be really, really tough to stop. So in my mind, offensively, no questions, for me, Christian. I want to kick it over to you, though, for those Georgia Bulldog defense.
Yeah, Chris. So exactly what you said. I mean, Georgia last year, they had a really, they had another great year on defense, right? It was another top 10 defense, and I think they're going to be even better this year, right? To me, it all starts up front. Now, in years past, we talked about this with Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. They're two defensive tackles. It seemed like they kind of, we talk about just creating pressure, right? From a defensive standpoint. When you can have two guys that can really, force quarterbacks to not step up in a pocket, but rather step out of a pocket, that's where you start to see those edge rushers and those defensive ends start to really, raise havoc and be able to create pressure, right? Which I think is exactly what Georgia kind of missed a little bit last year, right? In terms of, their defensive tackles. But again, are these guys going to be like the most uberly talented guys, right? And that is Nazir Stackhouse and Warren Brinson, who are going to probably be their defensive tackles. No, I mean, they weren't the most highly recruited guys, but they've been around for a while. They know the Georgia Bulldog standard. They had another year in the in the off-season conditioning program and strength program. So I think they're going to be they're not going to be slouches by any stretch of the imagination. I do think they're going to be better, and I think that's going to elevate the entire defense as well, right? Both those guys, by the way, they had 4 combined sacks last year. I think they can get that up upwards of 8, and I do think you're going to see some younger guys who are really, really talented, kind of step in there and play. Names guys like Christian Miller, I believe, Jamal Jarrett. You got a lot of guys like that. Jordan Hall. They got a ton of guys, on that defensive line they can rotate in and out. Jump into the linebacker room. To me, it's one of the deepest in the country, right? That's why you see, if you look around the SEC or you look around college football, you'll see a guy that transferred from Georgia that's a linebacker in the secondary, just because they're kind of loaded that way on defense. And you're like, oh my God, Georgia lost another 5-star. Or they lost another really highly rated 4-star, but they just replace them, right? It's crazy. You got guys like Michael Williams, C.J. Allen, Smile Munden, Jalen Walker, right, in that room. Those guys are loaded. By the way, I don't know what it is. The Dogs always have a linebacker named Walker of some kind, which is kind of cool. But whatever, I digress. The secondary is probably, where the most questions are at. It's probably where the most questions have been at for the last couple of years. But again, the Bulldogs do a really good job at replacing talent and kind of slotting guys in and out of positions. But Julian Humphreys and Daylon Everett, both really highly rated guys coming out of high school, both kind of cycled in and out, played a little bit last year. They're going to be the corners for you. So I think that they're going to be okay there. A lot of talent in the secondary, I have to say that. To me, the safeties, right? That's where we talk about it. They have one of the best safeties in the country, in my opinion. Malachi Starks, who's one of the most well-balanced safeties in the country. He can come up and play the run game. He can also drop back and play center field and pretty much make some things happen there. Started pretty much as a true freshman when he got to Athens, which is pretty cool. So, with that being said, Chris, let's kind of jump in here, and I'll start us off with where I think their record is going to be this year. So, Chris, I got them going 12-0. Now, that's pretty controversial. A lot of people, they look at Georgia's schedule, they dissect it, they say, oh my God, they got to play a lot of teams from what used to be the SEC West, okay? And it starts with the game again. We'll talk about this here first before we get into that. Clemson. First game of the year, neutral site game, they got to go play Clemson. Look, we know what Dabo is. We know his incessant insistence on not hitting the portal, kind of wanting football to go back to the way it was, is what it is. We know what Clemson is. We did a breakdown on them. I do think Clemson's going to be better this year, but drawing Georgia right out the gate is going to be pretty tough for them. I think Kirby and this Bulldogs team has been fired up all offseason long after the I can't really say I disagree with us getting left out of the playoffs, on one hand, but on the other side of it, it's like if it's really about the best 4 teams in the country, I think Georgia definitely fits that criteria. So they're going to be fired up. They're going to be looking for revenge, I think, all year long. You start getting into some of the rest of the schedule, and you could start penciling losses here, losses there. I think the game against Bama, even though it's at Bama, Kirby's biggest Achilles heel has been Nick Saban. Okay? Has been Nick Saban. I want to stress that as much as I possibly can. You look at DeBoer. We'll talk about this here in a little bit when we do our Alabama video. But you look at Kalen DeBoer and what he was at Washington, and then their Achilles heel in the national championship game was they got out physicaled. Okay, it wasn't necessarily an out talented thing, but they got out physicaled by Michigan. What do you think Georgia's going to do? On September 28th there when they come to town to play them? Again, we watched the spring game. It looked noticeably different than what a lot of these Bama spring games have looked like, right? In the fact that, the defense just looked lost. It just looked like something completely different. So I think Georgia's going to come ready to play. They get Auburn at home. Mississippi State's going to be one of the worst teams in the SEC. The game against Texas, it's on the road. That's going to be a tough game. Okay, that's going to be a tough game. I still think, like we said about Bama, I think that applies to Texas. Okay. I think Texas is, improved. I think they're going to be a good team this year, but I think Georgia is just going to out physical them, right? We said the same thing about Ole Miss, and they do play Ole Miss again and whatnot. They got to go on the road to play at Ole Miss. To me, that's probably going to be one of their toughest games this year because Ole Miss has talent, and we'll kind of dive into that a little bit later on too. Tennessee, you got Tennessee at home, pretty much Massachusetts. If Massachusetts beats Georgia, I don't know what the hell to say. Somebody's going to make a lot of money probably. And then they finish the year off versus Georgia Tech. Again, they get that game at home. I think that'll be I don't want to say a trap game. I just think that's kind of the energy they bring into that game is going to really say a lot. So, Chris, with that, I'll throw it over to you. Let's see what you got.
I don't usually do this. I said 2 teams were going to go undefeated last year. It was Florida State and Georgia. I was right during the regular season. I got Georgia going undefeated as well this year through the regular season. Kirby hasn't lost a regular season game, I swear, in like 3 years. If he loses a game, usually it's to obviously Nick Saban in the SEC title game is what it seems to be. Nick Saban's no longer there. But as you said, that first game of the year against Clemson, I think that'll be this is going to tell me more about Clemson than it is about Georgia, to be honest with you. I think Clemson's headed in the wrong direction. That's just my opinion. Last couple of years, they've struggled. I think Georgia beats the brakes off them. That's just me personally. You got Tennessee Tech. I think the at-Kentucky game will be a good physical game. We've talked about Kentucky. They're a physical team, one of the more physical teams in the SEC. It is on the road. That'll be, Georgia's first test on the road at Kentucky. I think that'll be a close game than people think maybe for a half, but Georgia's the more talented team. We know that. The at Alabama game, I'm with you there. I said this last year, and I'm going to say it again. I actually truly think now with Saban being gone, I know it's at Bryce Denny. I get all that. I understand. I think Georgia beats the hell out of Alabama this year. I just do. I think they're the more physical team. Alabama is going to be very good. I know it's going to be interesting to see what they do with DeBoer and how they use Jalen Milroe, because DeBoer is a different type of coach. He likes to throw the ball. Milroe's a runner. I get all that. I think Bama's going to have a really good run game this year. I do think they'll probably be one of the top teams rushing in the country, but you got to be able to throw the ball too, especially if you get down early. So give me Georgia in that one, obviously. Auburn, that was a close game last year. Auburn was winning that game at halftime. We know that. But Auburn doesn't have the horses that Georgia does for the long haul. So Mississippi State, you better beat them. The at Texas is interesting. I wanted to take Texas in this game, but the reason why I'm not is because you said it, physicality. I've said this when we did our Texas, prediction video, is that to me, they're not an uber physical team. I didn't see it last year. You play in the SEC now. This isn't the Big 12 anymore. I like Georgia in this game. I know everybody's going to have this game circled. I get that. And I could see why people would lean Texas, especially with it being at home. But I'm taking Georgia at Florida. Georgia's own Florida of late. I don't see anything changing there. At Ole Miss, we saw that game last year. I'll never forget this. Me and you were texting each other during that game. It was like 14-14 after the first quarter. Looked like it was going to be a track meet. All of a sudden, Kirby Smart doing what he always does with great defenses and in the great defensive mind that he is, put the clamps on. That game ended up being like 48-14 was the final. Georgia was just way too much. I kind of think a similar thing happens this year. I really do. Nothing against Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin, but I just like the physicality level of Georgia more than I do almost any other team in the country. Tennessee. Now, this game I think will be interesting. I know I'm pretty high on Tennessee. I think you kind of are too, Christian, this year as well. Could they lose this game? They could. Like I said, this schedule is not easy by any means. Georgia plays a lot of good teams here, especially on the road. But they do get Tennessee at home. Give me Georgia. I think that game will be relatively close, though. Massachusetts, you better win that one. And then a follow-up, Georgia Tech. As much as, I get that's a rivalry game in state. I understand all of that. But Georgia's just the way better team with the way better coach. So, yeah, overall, I got them going 12-0. Christian, I want to ask you one question because we know what the ceiling is. What would be maybe the floor this year for Georgia, in your opinion?
I would say the floor for Georgia is probably 2 losses. I struggle to say Kirby loses more than two games a year in a regular season game. To me, what makes Georgia so difficult on both sides of the football, Chris, is they're physical, right? They are physical as all get out. But it's not just about, there's a lot of physical teams, that we see every year, like Iowa, Wisconsin, right? Michigan, now even like Ohio State. The thing that separates Georgia from any of those people, is they're not just physical, Chris. They also are loaded with talent. So if somebody goes down, they can replace that guy. And to me, that's one of the biggest things that separates Georgia from a lot of different schools is, they combine all the things. Like it's kind of like with Saban at Alabama, right? They were the most talented team on the field. They were the most physical team on the field. They were normally the most disciplined team on the field. And then to follow it up, they had the best coach on the field, right? He's gone now, so that kind of has to apply that same rule to Georgia. The thing that makes Kirby really, really great is his ability, especially on the defensive side of the ball, to make adjustments in game, right? So to me, it's some of those things where I think, hey, it's really hard to beat Kirby and the Bulldogs, and if you do, they use that as motivation going forward. One of the best things that can come out of a season is a regular season loss if you can respond to it appropriately. I'll flip it back to you. What do you think the floor is, Chris?
Do you hit the nail on the head? Exact same thing. I don't see Kirby losing more than 2 games this year. Like I said, I know this schedule is tough. Injuries are going to happen. If something even drastic happens, honestly, I hate to say this, and I hope it doesn't happen, but say Carson Beck would happen to get hurt or something like that. One thing I can rely on Kirby every single year, that defense is going to be elite this year. Even if they have injuries on the defensive side of the ball, they got so many 5 stars and guys that rotate in and out, and they got so much depth. And I've said this forever, Kirby's one of the last coaches left that's really a truly defensive mind. They're going to be in every game then. I don't care who it is. That's one thing I love about Georgia and respect them for it is that they play physical, as you said. They're well-disciplined. They got a lot of depth, and they play defense week in, week out. Defense travels, Even if Carson Beck has a bad game against Texas, I still think Georgia can hang in that game just strictly on their defense. I truly do. As good as, we think yours is going to be this year in that Texas offense, for example. So Will there be some scares along the way? Yeah, Georgia's not going to play a perfect game every single week. We know that. But football games are 4 quarters. They're not played on paper. We know that. So, yeah, I would say maybe 10-2 would be worst case scenario, Christian.